It's the year 2063 when the Earth is heating up and is on the verge of collapse due to drought, famine, and climate change, which plague humans worldwide. This necessitates finding a new planet where humans can survive, thrive, and be alive before the imminent destruction of the Earth claims their lives and kills them. Much to their luck, with the technological advancement in 2063, humans found a new planet that might be habitable. To find out more about this planet, humans decide to send a 30-member crew to this planet on an 86-year-long scouting mission to see if it's a good planet to live on.
The voyage there will take 86 years.
Given the length of the mission, the crew is expected to have children who will carry on the mission. And not only that, but the grandchildren of the crew will be the ones to find the planet by the end of the mission. Since the crew will be in space for the rest of their lives, they are expected to feel homesick at some point in the mission. To counter this problem, 30 babies are bred artificially using IVF, which stands for in vitro fertilization. According to the astronaut named Richard, the 30 babies will be raised and trained in isolation from the real world to make sure they won't miss the Earth during the voyage. Since the children will be sent to space at a young age, Richard is concerned the children won't be able to face the challenges and dangers of the mission when they arise.
They'll be on the ship alone.
6 years later, Richard goes to the isolated facility where the 30 children are. After wearing a protective suit, Richard goes to see the children. Surprisingly, they all hug him and look up to him as a dad. Afterward, Richard tends to their education as his responsibility. He also sees that they all sleep well at night, as he says goodnight to Christopher, Seela, and Zach. The next day, Richard approaches his colleague, Marianne, and proposes an idea. He wants to go on the 86-year mission with crew in space. Marianne tells him he'll die up there in space, but Richard replies he'll die on Earth eventually and assures her he won't miss a thing about Earth. Richard also adds that if he goes with the children on the mission, he'll raise them, protect them, and teach them how to deal with the dangers when they arise in space. Hearing this, Marianne is convinced, knowing that Richard is right.
You know I'm right.
4 years later, the ship is launched to space, and Richard is on board with the 10-year-old children. Once the ship named Humanitas is in space, the crew of 10-year-olds finds their rooms in the ship, while Richard looks down on the Earth from the ship and bids it farewell now that the 86-year-long voyage has just begun. 10 years later, the Voyagers are now 20 years old. Much like robots, they all follow the same monotonous routine. They wake up and tend to their education about the mission being necessary for the survival of the human race. They also learn that they'll have children using artificially through IVF so that their children and grandchildren will carry on the mission after them. After playing some cardio exercises in the gym, they learn about fixing any tech-related faults and malfunctions in the ship. Afterwards, the Voyagers have their lunch in the cafeteria and drink a blue liquid. While the adult Christopher and Zach are having fun listening to music, Seela is visibly bothered by something as she looks out of the ship. She opens up to Richard. It turns out she feels her life is unimportant, knowing she'll die in space, and her grandchildren will be the ones to discover the planet, not her or any one of her crew. Richard reassures her that the life of every single Voyager on this ship is highly important. After he shows her a picture of his parents and grandparents, Richard tells Seela that his grandparents worked hard to raise his parents so that his parents can raise him. Based on this, Richard concludes that working hard to raise the next generation is the purpose of their lives, which means their lives are more important than they think they are.
That is my father.
The next day, the Voyagers are watering the plants, which are their source of food, when Christopher discovers a toxin in the irrigation water. Christopher tells Richard about this and adds that this toxin is coming from their urine. The food or drink the Voyagers have is toxic. This concerns Christopher, but Richard assures him their bodies are strong for this toxin. That's why Richard dismisses it and tells Christopher to just change the filter. However, the toxins pique Christopher's curiosity. He later looks into it and tells his best friend Zach about it. For this reason, the two sneak out of their rooms at night and look up the toxin. It turns out that this toxin decreases pleasure responses and energy, but Zach wants increased pleasure. He puts 2 and 2 together and figures out this drug is in the blue liquid they drink every day. Christopher becomes convinced that Richard is drugging them to keep them under control. That's why the two choose not to drink the blue next morning. Shortly after, Christopher and Zach tell what they've found out so far to their friends Kai and Julie. The duo talks about the blue drink, but they also have discovered an unmarked and hidden compartment in the ship, which Richard didn't talk about at all. Given this, the four are convinced that Richard is lying to them.
Well, Christopher found a hidden compartment.
By the end of the day, Christopher confronts Richard about the hidden compartment. Richard replies that this compartment might be for Christopher's grandchildren. He also adds that the mission control keeps them all, including him, on a need-to-know basis. Though a bit anxious, Richard maintains a calm exterior in front of Christopher. Following this, Richard sends a video message to the mission control on Earth. He says he wants to be completely honest to the Voyagers he leads. He asks for permission to be allowed to share the secret information in the ship with the Voyagers, because if they find out about the secrets, they will doubt Richard as a leader.
It means they know when I'm not telling them the truth, and that's my point.
The next day, after lunch, Zach also approaches Sela and tells her he likes her, but Sela is creeped out when Zach grabs her by the arm before Richard stops him and tells him no grabbing. Since they haven't drunk the blue for days, Zach and Christopher start feeling a flood of energy and pleasure. They astonish everyone in the gym when they energetically wrestle and grab each other, leaving everyone in the gym dumbfounded. After the naughty duo horse around and chase each other in the corridors, they pass by Richard's room. Zach spots Richard putting his hand on Sela's soldier while he talks to her. This pisses off Zach and makes him feel jealous of his crush, Sela. Richard told him no grabbing earlier, but now he's secretly touching Sela. The duo are convinced that Richard is a hypocrite. Later, Richard gathers the Voyagers and tells them the transmitter outside the ship has malfunctioned. This means they can't communicate with the Earth. Therefore, he decides to venture into the space to fix it. He also wants Zach to come with him. Shortly after, Zach approaches Sela. Since Zach's going out, she explains to him how to wear the astronaut suit, but Zach grabs her again before Richard pushes him away and saves her. He asks him what he's doing and promises to ground him if he doesn't talk, but Zach storms off, ignoring Richard. While looking for Zach, Richard runs into a girl named Phoebe and asks if Zach's done anything weird lately. When Phoebe replies, Richard learns that Zach stopped drinking the blue liquid.
He stopped taking the blue.
Hearing this, Richard talks to Zach's best friend, Christopher. He asks him if he's still drinking the blue liquid or not. Christopher says no and accuses Richard of drugging the crew, but Richard replies that this blue drink helps the crew to control their impulses to prevent violence and chaos in the ship. Christopher doesn't like hearing this at all. Richard decides to have Christopher come outside with him to help fix the transmitter instead of Zach. When Christopher says no, Richard offers him the opportunity to complain to Mission Control about the blue liquid when they're done. Richard also assures Christopher he'll back him up, convincing Christopher to come with him and changing his mind. He helps him put on his suit to go out. As the two glide in space, Christopher looks at the stars, marveling at their beauty. The other Voyagers are monitoring the two from inside the ship when Richard orders Kai to turn off the transmitter. Just then, something black appears, charging towards Edward, shaking up the ship and causing Edward to die in a mysterious shock of events. The alarm goes off as the system room catches fire. Christopher brings the dead Richard back inside the ship while the crew tries to find out what went wrong. Despite the crew's best effort to resuscitate Richard, they fail. Being the chief medical officer, Sela pronounces Richard dead. Christopher gathers everybody and asks what happened and if they saw anything weird on the monitor. A guy named Edward says he saw something black jumping into Richard before he died. Christopher then reassures his fellow Voyagers that they're safe inside the ship from whatever killed Richard on the outside. However, the crew is still worried about what will happen to them. After all, Richard was their leader, but now they are on their own. Christopher assures them that Richard was going to die at any point, only it happened earlier. Christopher then assures them nothing will happen to them so long as they stick together.
If we keep it together, we'll be all right.
After the system of the ship restarts, Christopher asks Edward to replay the recording to understand what actually killed Richard. Unfortunately, the recording is lost and the surveillance is destroyed due to the fire in the system room. With Richard dead, the crew needs a new leader or chief officer. According to the rules, an election must be held to appoint that new leader. Zach decides to step up and be the leader, being the head engineer. However, Julie interrupts and says an election must be held where everybody gets to vote for the new leader. After everybody votes, Christopher comes out as the winner of the election. This pisses off Zach and fuels his resentment towards Christopher, but he bottles it up for now and congratulates Christopher on his win. As the new chief officer, Christopher orders the crew to fix the damage that has been done to the system and surveillance.
We can work our way out of this.
Meanwhile, Selah goes through Richard's belongings and personal archive and looks into his memories during his time on Earth. Christopher knocks on the door and joins her in watching Richard's personal recordings with his parents. Given that Richard showed her his personal recordings, Christopher asks Selah if there was anything between her and Richard. Selah says no, but Christopher replies that he saw Richard touching her. Selah assures him that Richard was just her friend, and he needed someone to talk to about his life. The two then watch a recorded video of Richard he sent to Mission Control, where he expresses his concerns for the crew. He also reveals that he joined the mission to protect the crew and make sure they're okay. That makes Selah wonder, protect us from what?
I want to protect him.
Following this, Christopher goes to check on the crew, but finds none of them fixing the surveillance like he ordered, but Phoebe. Instead, he finds them fixing something else. When he confronts them about it, he learns the refrigerator broke down after the system room caught fire. Zach suggests eating the food in the fridge before it goes bad. Besides, this could be a great feast celebrating the new chief officer, to which Christopher says why not. Following the feast, some of the crew members are about to drink the blue liquid before Kai stops them, telling them Zach ordered them not to because it's a drug. Convinced, the crew pours out the blue drink. That causes the whole crew to become extremely energetic and chaotic in the gym room, except for Selah, who's all by herself, unaware of what's happening. Shortly after, Zach and his friends are in Richard's room watching his personal archive when Selah comes in and shouts at them to get out, since she's the one responsible for Richard's archive. Once they're all out, Selah is securing the door to Richard's room when Zach reminds her that Richard is not here to protect her anymore. Selah replies that she doesn't need his protection. This causes Selah to feel threatened by Zach. For this reason, she secretly arms herself with a scalpel. Meanwhile, Christopher confronts Zach and tells him to stay away from Selah. Zach doesn't like getting orders from Christopher, so he replies that he'll only do what he wants. The crew becomes more chaotic and unruly when a fight breaks between Kai and Peter in the cafeteria. Once the fight is broken up, a pissed-off Christopher gathers the whole crew and tells them off for slacking off and not tending to their work. He tries to get them back in line and orders them to go back to fixing the system room and the surveillance. Some refuse. They think there's an alien in the systems room. Phoebe doubts if there was an alien and suggests repairing the surveillance in the system room. This way, they'll see what killed Richard. Zach interrupts. He tells Phoebe to shut up and unleashes his hatred toward Christopher. He asks him who he is to order everybody around. Phoebe reminds him Christopher is the elected chief officer, but Zach doesn't care about the rules. He states that Christopher is not fit to be a commander and that he will not take orders from him again. That's why Zach announces himself to be the new leader and promises the crew he'll feed them. He also stirs up fear about the alien and then reassures the crew that he'll protect them from it. That convinces the majority of the crew members to abandon Christopher and follow Zach as the new leader, while the remaining few are still with Christopher.
We'll have more food so we're strong.
Christopher then goes to the system room and retrieves the surveillance drive. Shortly after, Zach and his group arrive at the system room, looking for Christopher. Zach has Kai come inside with him to the system's room while the others wait outside. Zach and Kai go inside where Christopher was to check the surveillance. As the others wait outside, a ruckus is heard inside as Zach's and Kai's shouts grow louder. It seems like they're fighting someone when they burst out of the room and order everybody to close the door. Fortunately, Christopher managed to retrieve the surveillance drive from the system room before Zach even got there. As he and Selah play it, two crew members inform them that an alien attacked Zach and Kai while they were in the system room.
Close it! Close it!
Hearing this, Selah figures out Zach and Kai went to the system room under the guise of fighting the alien with the intention of destroying the surveillance drive. Obviously, the two have a dirty little secret they don't want anyone to know. That makes Christopher curious. He fixes the drive and finds the surveillance recording of Zach and Kai when he and Richard were fixing the transmitter outside the ship earlier. During that time, Richard ordered Kai to turn off the transmitter to ensure he wouldn't get electrocuted to death. However, Zach resented Richard for not letting him touch Selah, so he turned on the transmitter with the intention of giving Richard a minor electrical shock, but he ended up killing him. This recording leaves Christopher and his group shocked and appalled. Christopher and Sela tell their group not to tell anyone about the recording.
Murder.
The next morning, Christopher and his group meet up with Zach in the cafeteria after he invited them to breakfast. Zach stands before them all and announces himself to be the new chief officer, but Christopher plays the surveillance drive, exposing Zach and Kai as the ones who killed Richard. Christopher then adds that the alien is a lie and assures everyone that Zach caused Richard to get electrocuted to death. This infuriates the crew. Surprisingly, Zach admits that he killed Richard, but he then adds that he did it because he knew the alien was inside Richard, and Christopher brought it into the ship when he brought Richard's body inside. While Kai backs him up, Zach stokes fear and says the alien might be inside any one of the crew.
Could be you.
This causes chaos, leading the crew to believe the alien is inside Peter's body. Before they could attack him, Peter runs off, but the crew chases him while Zach vindictively smiles at their foolishness. Eventually, the crew catches Peter and beats him up. Despite Christopher ordering them to stop, they elbow him in the face and continue to beat Peter up to death. This leaves Christopher and his group backed into a corner. Two of his group, Anda and Alex, suggest joining Zach and then killing him when he lowers his guard because now they don't have any weapons. Hearing the word weapons, Sela recalls watching Richard's video diary, where he mentions that Christopher knows about the secret weapon compartment in the ship. For this reason, Christopher decides to find these weapons. Secretly, he goes through a vent and locates the door to the hidden compartment. He types the password to unlock the door, but fails, causing the beeping sounds from the password pad to be heard by Tayo and Julie, who happen to be passing by. Thinking the alien is inside the wall, Julie decides to tell Zach. Afterward, Christopher gets out of the vent and looks for a tool to unlock the compartment door, but when he spots Zach and his crew breaking the wall to unlock the hidden compartment, Julie asks Zach if the beep sound she heard earlier was caused by the alien, but Zach immediately recognizes this as the doing of Christopher. Christopher retreats to warn his crew, while Zach's group forces its way into the compartment to access the weapons. Kai recognizes these weapons are for their grandchildren when they reach the new planet. However, Zach selfishly replies that these weapons are theirs. Christopher, Sela, and Phoebe rush to the briefing room, while Alex and Anda meet up with Zach and his group and decide to join him. Zach says yes on condition that they tell him where Christopher is. Meanwhile, Christopher and the two girls watch Zach from the camera recording talking to Anda and Alex. He sees that Zach's are armed, while the only weapon Christopher's group has is a scalpel. This gives Christopher a new idea. He decides to join Zach's group and kill him when he lowers his guard. Just then, Sela notices Zach's group is on the move. Kai cuts the power in the briefing room where Christopher is. Zach stands outside the room before he has his group raided and drag Christopher away. Sela tells Zach to stop. While secretly holding the scalpel, Sela asks to join Zach's group and slowly tries to get closer to him. However, Zach rejects her and gets his group to laugh at her when a furious Phoebe scolds Zach and his group. She tries to make them see reason, telling them that fighting is against their human nature. When Zach objects, Phoebe persists and tells them to act rationally and stop killing each other. Everybody tells her to shut up, but Phoebe defies them and urges them to be better and stop killing each other like animals. Before she can continue her speech, Kai shoots her dead, shocking everybody, including Sela, who drops her scalpel.
Do you want to...
This does nothing but fuel Zach's megalomania. As he shouts that this is what happens to anyone who defies him, he points his gun at Christopher and shoots at him, but Christopher runs away before Sela follows him. The two go to the plant's room and hide in the vent before Zach and his guys trace them to this room. Zach thinks Christopher is hiding in one of the vents, so he shoots them all with the intention of killing Christopher and Sela. Fortunately, Sela and Christopher manage to escape and hide in the medical room and lock the door. However, Kai shoots the door open. As soon as he walks in, the two ambush him. Sela injects him before Christopher hits him with the oxygen tank, killing him. Christopher arms himself with Kai's weapon and goes out to hide someplace else with Sela. However, Zach finds the two and starts shooting after them. Christopher tries shooting back, but Zach shoots his weapon, disarming him. Christopher and Sela run away, locking every door behind them, while Zach calmly follows them, confident that he'll eventually catch them. Eventually, Christopher and Sela flee to the airlock, where they suit up to get out of the ship to the open space. Zack traces the two to the airlock. As soon as he opens the door, he gets ambushed by the two who open the hatch to space. Zack attacks Sela and tries to unlock the hatch, but Christopher saves her and fights Zack. However, the fight ends with Christopher out of the ship, holding onto Zack's shirt. However, the shirt rips, causing Christopher to glide away into the wide space. Zack is about to unlock the door, but Sela kicks him out in a surprise attack, sending him out to his inevitable death. Just as it seems Christopher is gone, Sela stops the hatch from closing and breathlessly waits for him to show up. To her luck, Christopher emerges alive from afar after he managed to hold on to the ship. This relieves Sela, who joyfully tears up that Christopher is alive. Shortly after, Christopher and Sela talk to Zack's group, who hold the two at gunpoint. When Christopher assures them that Zack is no more, they all lower their weapons, and the crew is under Christopher's command once again. Everything goes back to normal, as everybody goes back to eating alongside each other again, as if nothing has happened.
How do we make sure it doesn't happen again?
Later, a new chief officer is elected, and that chief is Sela. On a video call to the mission control, Sela reveals the ship stopped taking the blue liquid. She adds that the best course of action is to make the crew believe in themselves, that they can do better for the sake of their children and grandchildren. Months later, Christopher and Sela have a child. Many years later, that child grows up and plays with the other kids who were born in the ship. As the decades pass, the original crew's children grow up to be succeeded by their children, who will carry on the mission and be the ones to see the new planet. Eventually, the ship reaches the new planet with its new shining sun, which the crew is happy to see after generations of traveling in space. What's more, this planet looks like the Earth, which is a sign of a great habitable planet.